I watched helplessly from my porch as flames consumed my home, each furious crackle, and pop a clear message from the HOA that they'd gone too far. But they had no idea. They just attacked the property of a feared judge who never backed down from a fight. When I bought the house at the corner of Sycamore and Brookfield, I wasn't looking for trouble. I wanted silence, a place where my career and my past could finally take a back seat to a slower, simpler life. After 3 decades serving as a federal circuit judge presiding over mob cases, white-collar corruption trials, and everything in between, I'd grown used to mask lies and leverage, but I'd also grown tired. I retired quietly, packed up my law library and my old golden retriever, and settled into a quaint cul-de-sac on the edge of a community called Maple Gate Estates. At first glance, it looked like paradise: clean sidewalks, chirping birds, families waving from porches. Nobody knew who I was. I liked it that way. I figured if I kept my head down, stayed neighborly, and paid my dues like everyone else, I'd be left in peace. That illusion lasted about 6 days. The first envelope came in the mail, no stamp, just slid into my mailbox like a threat, folded in thirds. The paper was thick, the ink too dark, and the language too formal for something so ridiculous. I was being cited for having an unapproved mailbox color. Apparently mine, a deep hunter green, was in violation of community aesthetic cohesion standards, whatever that meant. The HOA wanted it repainted standard beige by the end of the week, or I'd incur a $150 fine. I laughed, tossed the letter on the counter, and forgot about it until the next one arrived. This time they wanted me to remove a heritage Japanese maple that had stood in the corner of my front lawn since before the neighborhood was even developed too close to the sidewalk. The notice claimed roots pose a trip hazard. The sidewalk was a full 6 feet from the trunk. It was nonsense, but the citations kept coming: one for overgrown grass despite it being freshly mowed, another for inadequate seasonal decoration effort, because apparently not stringing Christmas lights was now a punishable offense. Every time I thought it would stop, a new one showed up, signed with a looping signature in bold blue ink: Karen Whitmore, HOA president. I didn't know her at first, just caught glimpses: a severe-looking woman in pastel workout gear, always with a clipboard, always watching. I noticed her stopping by my house on her morning walks, squinting at my front door like it owed her something. I figured she was just a stickler. Then I caught her crouched in my flower beds with a measuring tape. That was the moment I realized it wasn't about rules, it was about control, and I was a new variable she couldn't account for. She ramped things up, started having her cronies, 2 smug-faced board members named Doug and Mara, do inspections on their lunch breaks. They'd circle my property like sharks, jotting notes, pretending not to look directly at the security camera I'd installed above the garage. When that camera mysteriously stopped working one night, I replaced it with a better one: motion detection, cloud uploads, night vision. I wasn't just some clueless retiree. I'd put away senators, CEOs, and a bishop once. I knew how power hid behind procedure. I documented everything. The citations became absurd: non-regulation, trash bin, color wind chimes, audible from public sidewalk failure, to adequately obscure utilities. Each came with an escalating fine. I contested. Everyone filed formal disputes, quoted their own bylaws back at them. I knew I was winning because the citations stopped coming in the mail and started appearing directly, taped to my door, bright orange, impossible to miss, and always applied while I was out. That's when the vandalism began. It started small: my back gate left mysteriously ajar, a crack in my porch light cover that hadn't been there before. But then I woke up one morning to find my front passenger side tires slashed. The police came, filled out a report, said it was probably random vandalism. I doubted it. A week later, someone spray painted lawyer scum across my garage door in dripping red letters. I don't talk about what happened the night after that, when I heard glass shatter downstairs and came running to find my front window broken, a chunk of landscaping rock lying on the rug, and my dog trembling beside it. The message was clear: I was being warned, but they underestimated me. I changed out every lock. I installed floodlights, cameras, and reinforced my mailbox. I began my own investigation, cross-referencing complaint patterns with HOA meeting minutes. I found that every resident who dared challenge Karen's authority about their fence height, their porch furniture, their backyard sheds, had either been fined into submission or quietly moved out. She had a pattern, a method, and she was using HOA power to intimidate and harass anyone who didn't fit her vision. I brought my findings to the next open board meeting, calmly reciting violations of HOA statutes and even local ordinances. Karen smiled through clenched teeth and suggested I take a break from worrying so much. 2 nights later, someone egged my car. The next morning, 3 of my fence boards had been ripped clean off. The police came again, useless, as before, and Karen just happened to be walking her dog past my house as they filed their report. Such a shame, she said, shaking her head. You know, this neighborhood used to be so peaceful before all the litigation started. That was the last straw. I started collecting affidavit from neighbors, quiet ones, the kind who nodded nervously when you mentioned the HOA but refused to speak up. One elderly man whispered that he tried filing a complaint last year and found sugar poured into his car's gas tank. The next week, another had his backyard garden labeled a nuisance agricultural installation and bulldozed without notice. Karen's reach was long, and she wore that power like a badge, but all tyrants slip. Eventually, the final escalation came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I returned from the hardware store to find my garage wide open, paint thinner splashed across the floor, and the word "leave" scratched into the side of my workbench. No valuables were taken, nothing stolen, just a message, a statement, a dare. The fire hadn't come yet, but the fuse was lit. And what they didn't realize, what they couldn't have known, was that I was done playing defense. I'd been in enough courtrooms to know the value of patience. Retaliation, real effective retaliation, requires control, and control starts with documentation. After the garage incident, I could have struck hard. I had enough circumstantial evidence to file a civil complaint against the HOA for harassment and property damage, but I wasn't interested in a slap fight over fines and fences. I wanted the truth to come out in a way that couldn't be spun or dismissed. So I waited, collected, prepared. I requested a formal slot on the next HOA agenda, citing Section 4.22 of the bylaws, which allowed any homeowner to speak publicly on issues affecting their property. Karen naturally delayed approval until the last possible moment, replying via email 2 hours before the meeting to say I'd have a brief window to share my concerns. That was fine. I didn't need a soapbox, just an audience. When Thursday evening arrived, I stepped into the fluorescent-lit community center, carrying a manila folder thick with photos, time-stamped videos, and copies of police reports. The board sat in their usual formation, Karen dead center in her pastel blazer, flanked by Mara and Doug, who never spoke unless prompted. The room was half full. Some faces I recognized from the street, some I didn't. I waited until the open forum and then calmly approached the podium. Over the last 6 weeks, I began projecting my voice like I had in court. My property has been vandalized on 4 separate occasions: tires slashed, windows broken, spray paint, intimidation. I've filed reports with the local police. Here are copies. I passed the stack to Karen, who didn't even glance down. Additionally, my security footage has captured individuals, identifiable individuals, trespassing and inspecting my property without consent, including members of this board. Murmurs swept through the room. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to ask the board formally to investigate these incidents and address what appears to be a pattern of targeted harassment. Karen leaned forward with a smile that made my skin crawl. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Whitaker, she said, voice syrupy. We're all very concerned about crime, but I'd like to remind the community that sometimes stress can cause us to see patterns where none exist. And as we all know, Mr. Proix Whitaker recently retired from a very high-pressure career. A few heads turned toward me with uncertainty. I also want to clarify, Karen continued, that security footage collected on private property is inadmissible in HOA proceedings without consent. That wasn't even close to true, but I bit my tongue, and that unfortunately we have no control over what local teenagers might be up to on a Friday night. The implication landed hard. Paranoid retiree inventing boogeymen. I saw it in their eyes. She'd shifted the narrative in under a minute. Some neighbors looked at me with sympathy, others with doubt. I stepped away from the podium without another word, reminding myself not to fight her in the court of public opinion. The real court would come later. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything, every notice taped to my door, every car that lingered too long in front of my house, every offhand comment from Mara about just wanting to keep things nice. I upgraded my home surveillance system, 12 new cameras with cloud backup, motion detection, and a 150-degree field of view. I filed a public records request for all HOA citations issued in the past year and began comparing the timing of my notices against known board meetings. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every time I challenged a citation, a new one appeared within 3 days. My mailbox had become a daily exercise in restraint. I reported each new incident to the police. They grew more attentive with each report, especially after I mentioned my former judicial credentials in passing. I made sure to email Karen each time I filed, short, polite, to the point. Dear Miss Whitmore, this is to inform you that another incident has been reported to the local authorities and is being documented in accordance with standard legal procedure. Thank you, it wasn't a threat, it was a ledger, a record, a noose tightening slowly by the book. The citations, meanwhile, grew increasingly absurd. One accused me of creating a visual obstruction by hanging wind chimes on my back porch. Another claimed my recycling bin had been improperly stored despite being exactly where the HOA regulations required. My favorite was the one that said my fence posed a potential threat to neighborhood children because of its unwelcoming coloration. The fence was white, the same white it had been when I bought the property, I wrote back. To that one in particular, dear hobo, I find it deeply troubling that you've chosen to allege a safety risk regarding the color of my fence. There is no code, regulation, or scientific basis for this assertion. Please be advised that if these false claims continue, I will be forced to pursue legal remedies. Sincerely, Judge R. Whitaker. Rhett. That signature, the title I hadn't yet used, was my first warning shot. I kept my tone civil, my language measured, but that line, that was a shot across Karen's manicured bow. The response came not by letter but in person. Karen appeared on my lawn the following afternoon with Doug in tow, holding another citation. You're violating height regulations, she said, gesturing to the hydrangea bush beside my porch. It exceeds 42, and that's a hazard. It's 38. I replied, holding up a measuring tape. I've trimmed it twice this month. Karen ignored the tape. We've received complaints from whom? I asked. Anonymous sources. That won't hold up, I said. She smirked. It doesn't have to. Not in HOA hearings, no, I replied, but in a deposition it does. That wiped the smirk off her face. Doug shifted uncomfortably. Are you threatening legal action? Not yet, I said, stepping closer, but I'm warning you, if this board continues to target my property with fabricated claims and retaliatory action, I will pursue injunctive relief. I'll subpoena every document, every board email, and every financial transaction you've processed. I'll file for discovery so fast your lawyer won't have time to invoice you. And I promise you, Ms. Whitmore, I've got more patience than you have. Petty citations. She said nothing, just turned and walked back to the sidewalk, Doug trailing behind her like a kicked dog. I watched them go, didn't move, just stood there, let them feel my silence. I knew they'd come again. Bullies don't back off after one loss, but they'd think harder next time, because for the first time in her life, Karen was up against someone who wasn't afraid of her gavel. It happened the one weekend I wasn't home. I'd accepted an invitation to speak at a judicial ethics conference, 3 states over, a rare request I couldn't turn down. 3 days in a sterile hotel ballroom talking precedent and procedure with federal peers. I left Friday morning with a suitcase, a speech, and a lingering sense of unease I couldn't shake. Before leaving, I double-checked my locks, armed the security system, and informed the local police of my absence, a habit from years of dealing with high-profile defendants who didn't like verdicts going against them. I even had my neighbor Ed from 2 houses down keeping an eye on things, though Ed was more bourbon than backbone. When I landed back home on Sunday evening, my phone had already buzzed 6 times in the span of 10 minutes. The first was a voicemail from Ed, his voice cracked and trembling. Your house, Jesus, Judge, call me. There was a fire. The next was from the local police department, followed by an email from the HOA. Subject line: Incident Report 14. Sycamore Lane. My stomach dropped as I pulled onto my street. I could smell the scorched wood before I even saw the wreckage. Smoke still hung in the air like a ghost that hadn't decided to leave yet. My porch was gone. My garage doors were warped inward like they'd been sucked into hell itself. The upper floor had collapsed partially onto the first. Fire crews had taped off the property and scattered cones across the lawn, now a graveyard of ash and broken siding. My knees nearly buckled at the sight of it. This wasn't an accident. This was a statement. I walked the perimeter, slowly, eyes scanning for anything salvageable. The arson investigator on site gave me a tight-lipped summary. Fire started at the back of the house just after midnight on Saturday. No signs of a lightning strike, no electrical short. Accelerant likely involved. You got enemies? He asked, squinting at me. Only the kind who wear khakis and carry clipboards? I muttered, but my voice caught in my throat as I rounded the back and saw the scorched remnants of my study, the room where I kept my grandfather's legal books, the wood-paneled sanctuary where I drafted the decisions that made my name. It was all gone, and yet like a miracle, in the middle of the storm, the black steel box bolted beneath the floorboards of my office closet still stood charred on the outside, but intact. The fireproof safe I'd installed when I bought the home. I dropped to my knees and unlatched it with trembling fingers. Inside were the documents that would change everything: court orders, hard drive backups, HOA financial disclosures I'd been collecting for months, surveillance photos, correspondence between board members that a whistleblowing neighbor had anonymously slid under my door weeks prior. They'd survived. Everything else had burned, but the evidence remained. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the lid and stood back up. Karen called it an unfortunate incident. That was the word she used in the email she sent to the entire community, CCing the police, the insurance adjuster, and the HOA lawyer. Of course, we at the board are saddened by the unfortunate incident at 14 Sycamore and hope that Mr. Whitaker recovers quickly. Our records show he was recently cautioned about improper storage of paint thinner near external HVAC units. While we cannot confirm any connection, this serves as a vital reminder for all homeowners to adhere to safety guidelines. I read the message twice before slamming my laptop closed. She was insinuating that I did it, that I burned my own house down. Karen and her inner circle began casually floating the theory to anyone who'd listen that I was a retired judge obsessed with lawsuits, looking for a reason to take down the HOA, that maybe I'd lost my mind, that the stress had finally caught up with me. A few neighbors whispered it over fences, others brought casseroles to my temporary rental and avoided eye contact. I saw the fear in their faces, not of me, of her, of what would happen to them if they spoke up, of being fined into oblivion or suddenly targeted for safety violations. Most people just wanted to keep their lawns mowed and their cars garaged without becoming collateral damage. I understood that I didn't fault them, but I also didn't need them, because Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that I wasn't just some crank with a gavel and a retirement fund. She didn't know that before I stepped down, I'd been one of the most feared names in judicial oversight that my courtroom had hosted. Billion-dollar corporations, state senators, and 3 different federal agencies, all scrambling to plea out before I ruled. She didn't know that I'd once exposed a real estate syndicate laundering foreign capital through rural development grants, and that I'd personally put 2 of its board members in federal prison. She didn't know that I still had the numbers of prosecutors, auditors, and forensic analysts who owed me favors and respected my calls more than they respected their own superiors. She didn't know that I'd been keeping tabs on her HOA's financial trail for months, not just the public books, but the shadow documents, the LLCs buried under landscaping contracts, the suspicious loans taken out in the name of emergency renovations that never seemed to break ground. She had no idea I'd subpoenaed my own home insurance company to retrieve unredacted fire assessment reports after her little narrative reached the adjuster's office, or that I'd already begun compiling a comprehensive timeline of every fine, every meeting, every falsified citation with digital metadata to match. While Karen smiled and pressed photos next to flower beds and fundraisers, I was already outlining depositions. She thought I was vulnerable, that I'd retreat into silence and scorch marks, but I was just getting started. You see, Karen didn't understand the difference between a threat and a consequence. A threat is a warning, a consequence is the follow-through. She'd played this game with ordinary people before, scaring them into submission, pushing just hard enough to make them move or surrender, but she'd lit a match in the wrong courtroom this time. She didn't know I'd already sent certified letters to the State Attorney General's office and the IRS flagging the HOA for suspected fraud and abuse of power. She didn't know I'd handed off digital copies of the financials to a friend at the Department of Housing and Urban Development who'd been hungry for a low-hanging corruption case with a media-ready villain. She didn't know that the only thing stronger than my anger was my patience, and while she spun tales in board meetings and curated her little empire of fear, I was calmly, meticulously assembling a bomb that would detonate under the entire foundation she'd built, not with explosives, with subpoenas, with discovery requests, with evidence and statutes, and a courtroom full of records that wouldn't burn no matter how many matches she lit. And when it all came crashing down, when the TV crews swarmed her manicured driveway and the handcuffs closed on her manicured wrists, I wouldn't say a word. I'd just watch, because the fire she lit wasn't the first I'd walked through, but it would be the last she ever started. Justice, unlike vengeance, doesn't arrive with rage. It arrives with silence, with order, with paperwork filed in triplicate and signatures that bleed accountability. By the time Karen realized the tide was shifting, the current was already dragging her out to See, I moved methodically, beginning with a discreet call to an old friend at the Department of Justice public corruption case, local jurisdiction, HOA using community power for personal gain. I didn't need to embellish, I let the facts do the talking. Within a week, I'd compiled a digital dossier so dense it crashed a paralegal's laptop, every fake violation, every payment routed through shell landscaping companies, every coerced homeowner who'd sold under pressure. It was all there. Karen and her cronies hadn't just overstepped, they'd industrialized their abuse, creating a small empire of intimidation disguised as neighborhood beautification. I leveraged my connections carefully. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wanted thoroughness, the kind of case that sticks. The FBI got involved next, quietly at first. Subpoenas were issued under seal. Surveillance was authorized for the first time. It wasn't my property under watch. It was theirs. Investigators traced fraudulent billing to multiple board members, inflated maintenance contracts paid to family-owned businesses, reserve funds rerouted into private investment portfolios, and suspicious withdrawals. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never assume rules protect the rule breakers. And never forget, justice may be slow, but it is thorough. What started as a battle over mailbox colors became a war over power and fear, not in a courtroom, but in a cul-de-sac. And like any war, it revealed what kind of people we truly are when pushed. So here's the advice. If you find yourself in a place where the people in charge abuse rules to control, punish, and silence others, don't play their game. Document. Stay calm. Build your case brick by brick. Because tyrants win when others back down, but they fall when someone stands up with evidence, patience, and unshakable purpose. And if you're that tyrant, remember, some people may move. Some may stay quiet. But one day, you'll pick a fight with the wrong neighbor. The kind who doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, they just file. And when they do, there won't be any warning. Only consequence.